Arizona Territory, 1879. The unforgiving desert sun beat down upon the dusty main street of Cottonwood Springs, where hopes withered just as quickly as ill-prepared travelers. In this harsh landscape, 22-year-old Josephine Vance had learned that survival meant keeping your head down and your expectations lower. With her honey-blonde hair typically pulled back in a practical bun, and her slender frame draped in simple, mended cotton dresses, she had long ago accepted that romance was a luxury the frontier did not afford women like her. "No sense in dreaming about things that won't come to pass," Josephine muttered as she swept the worn wooden porch of MacGregor's general store. The morning customers had tracked in the usual amount of dust and horse manure, and as the store owner's assistant, keeping the place presentable fell to her. 3 years of working at the general store had taught her that men wanted two things from women out here. Either they wanted someone pretty and delicate from back east to remind them of civilization, or they wanted someone sturdy and plain who could work from dawn till dusk without complaint. With her bad leg, the result of a childhood fever that had left her with a noticeable limp, Josephine believed she fell into neither category. Not delicate enough for courtship, not strong enough for hard labor. "Need anything else done before I take inventory in the back, Mr. MacGregor?" she called toward the older man counting coins at the register. "That'll do fine, Miss Vance. Mind those new shipments of canned goods." Last month's records were off by nearly $7. The storekeeper barely looked up, his attention fixed on his ledger. Josephine nodded and made her way to the storeroom, the familiar ache in her right leg more pronounced after standing all morning. Her limp was the physical manifestation of her deepest fear, that she was fundamentally damaged goods, unmarriageable in a territory where a woman's worth was tied to her ability to bear children and work alongside her husband. The thought had become so ingrained she scarcely questioned it anymore. What Josephine truly wanted was independence, enough money saved to perhaps open a small seamstress shop where she could sit while working. What she needed, though she would never admit it, was someone who saw beyond her limp to the fierce, intelligent woman beneath. Little did she know that her carefully constructed solitude was about to be disrupted by the arrival of a dusty stranger whose gentle eyes would see far more than her imperfection. The bell over the store's front door jangled as Josephine was noting down inventory figures. The sound of spurs clicking against the wooden floor followed, but she paid it little mind. Cowboys were common enough in Cottonwood Springs, usually just passing through on their way to larger cattle operations further north. "Afternoon, sir. What can I help you with today?" Mr. MacGregor's voice carried from the front. "Looking for supplies for the Double E Ranch," came a deep, pleasant voice. "Just got hired on last week, and the foreman sent me in for provisions." "Double E, that's Edward Evans' place. Good man, fair employer. You must be one of the new hands he mentioned hiring after buying that north section." Josephine continued her work, half listening to the conversation until she heard her name. "Miss Vance. Could you come help this young man find what he needs? I need to run these numbers over to the bank before it closes." Sighing quietly, Josephine set down her pencil and made her way back to the front of the store, her right leg dragging slightly as it always did when she grew tired. She rounded the corner and came face to face with the most striking cowboy she'd ever seen. He stood tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to suggest regular, hard labor, yet he carried himself with an easy grace that belied his size. His face was young, perhaps 25, with a light stubble framing a strong jaw. Beneath his tan Stetson, which he'd respectfully removed upon entering, dark blonde hair curled slightly. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, clear blue and direct. They met hers without the usual flicker down to her bad leg that she had grown accustomed to. "Miss," he said, tipping his head in greeting. "Name's Cole Evans, no relation to the boss," he added with a warm smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Just lucky coincidence." Josephine felt herself straighten instinctively, smoothing her apron. "Mr. Evans, what supplies do you need today?" Cole pulled a crumpled list from his pocket. "Got quite a few things here. Boss is stocking up before the fall roundup." As they moved through the store gathering items, Josephine couldn't help noticing how he naturally slowed his pace to match hers. not with pity but with a casual consideration, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. When she reached for a high shelf, struggling slightly with her balance, he didn't immediately rush to help but instead waited until she glanced at him. "Mind if I lend a hand with that?" he asked, respecting her independence. The small courtesy struck her more powerfully than any grand gesture might have. By the time they had filled 2 crates with supplies, she had learned that Cole had come from Texas looking for work after his family lost their small ranch in a drought, that he had a natural way with horses, and that his laughter came easily despite the hardships he'd faced. "You know Cottonwood Springs well?" he asked as she tallied his purchases. "Born and raised," she replied, "never been more than 20 miles from this spot." "Then you might be the perfect person to ask." He leaned slightly on the counter, his eyes warm. "Is there some place that serves a decent meal around here? The ranch cook tries his best, but—" He winced dramatically. Before she could stop herself, Josephine smiled. "Mrs. Daniels runs a small boarding house 3 doors down. Her stew is worth the 50 cents she charges." "Much obliged for the recommendation, Miss Vance." He collected his purchases, loading them efficiently into a waiting wagon outside. Just before leaving, he turned back. "Maybe I'll see you next time the Double E needs supplies." It was a casual comment, nothing more than politeness. Yet Josephine found herself watching him through the window as he drove away, wondering why her heart was beating so quickly. Over the next 2 weeks, Cole Evans appeared at the general store with remarkable frequency. Sometimes he had legitimate errands, a broken tool handle to replace, salt blocks for the cattle, but other times his purchases seemed suspiciously minor for the hour-long ride into town. "Need more writing paper," he explained on his 3rd visit, though Josephine distinctly remembered selling him a packet the previous week. "Turns out I've got more to say to my sister back in Texas than I thought." On his 5th visit, he lingered after completing his purchase. "You know, Mrs. Daniels' stew is mighty fine, like you said, but it's lonely eating at that big table by myself." Josephine looked up from the bolt of calico she was measuring for Mrs. Peterson. "The cowboys from the Lazy S usually take their meals there on Saturdays," she offered practically. Cole's smile dimmed slightly. "That's not exactly what I was getting at, Miss Vance." He twisted his hat in his hands. "What I mean to say is, would you consider joining me for supper tonight? That is, if you're not otherwise engaged." The request so startled her that Josephine nearly cut the fabric incorrectly. In 3 years of working at the store, not a single man had asked to court her properly. I finish work at 6, she found herself saying, though her practical mind was already listing all the reasons this was a foolish idea. His face brightened. "I'll be waiting right outside at 6 then." After he left, Josephine spent the remaining hours in a state of nervous anticipation, mingled with suspicion. Men didn't court women with bad legs, not unless they had ulterior motives. Perhaps he'd heard she had a small inheritance from her grandmother, or maybe it was some cruel wager among the ranch hands: court the limping shop girl, win a bottle of whiskey. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she had nearly convinced herself not to go. But when she stepped outside and saw Cole waiting, hat in hand and wearing a clean shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, her resolve faltered. "You look lovely, Miss Vance," he said, offering his arm. She hesitated before taking it. "Mr. Evans, I feel I should ask. Why did you invite me to supper? There are prettier girls in town without—" She gestured vaguely toward her right leg. His brow furrowed. "Without what?" he asked, and the genuine confusion in his voice caught her off guard. "My limp," she said bluntly. "Most men tend to notice it right away." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like indignation on her behalf. "Miss Vance, I noticed you have the brightest smile I've seen since crossing into the Arizona territory. I noticed you knew exactly where every item in that store was located without having to check. I noticed you're the only person in this town who didn't immediately ask if I was related to my boss, assuming instead I was my own man." He offered his arm again. "Now are you hungry? Because I've been thinking about Mrs. Daniels' biscuits all day." Stunned by his answer, Josephine took his arm, and they walked the short distance to the boarding house. where Mrs. Daniels raised her eyebrows so high at the sight of them together that they nearly disappeared into her hairline. That evening marked the beginning of a courtship unlike anything Josephine had dared to imagine for herself. Cole called on her properly every Saturday, taking her for walks along the creek outside town or to the occasional social at the small church. He spoke of his dreams to eventually have his own ranch, modest though it might be, and listened intently when she shared her hopes of opening a seamstress shop. "You've got an eye for detail," he said one evening as they sat on the porch of her small rented room behind the milliner's shop. "The way you matched that ribbon to Mrs. Peterson's new bonnet last week, most wouldn't have noticed the difference between those two shades of blue." Such specific compliments, focused on her abilities rather than empty flatteries about her appearance, made Josephine's defenses weaken despite her best efforts to maintain them. Still, she kept a part of herself guarded, waiting for the moment when Cole would finally tire of her company or reveal some hidden agenda. September brought the fall roundup, and Cole's visits necessarily became less frequent. The days he couldn't come to town, he sent notes with other ranch hands, simple messages that she kept in a small box beneath her bed, reading them by lantern light when doubts crept in during the long nights. On a crisp October morning, Josephine was arranging a new shipment of winter goods when the store door burst open with such force that the bell nearly flew off its mounting. Sheriff Taylor stood in the doorway, his typically composed face tight with concern. "Miss Vance, you're needed at Doc Miller's right away," he said without preamble. "There's been an accident at the Double E." The bolt of wool she'd been holding fell from her suddenly numb fingers. "Is it?" "It's Evans," the sheriff confirmed. "Horse spooked near the ravine during roundup. He took a bad fall." Mr. MacGregor appeared from the back room. "Go on, girl," he said gruffly. "I'll mind the store." Josephine didn't remember the walk to the doctor's office, only the pounding of her heart that seemed to match the uneven rhythm of her steps. When she arrived, Mrs. Miller, the doctor's wife, led her to a back room where Cole lay on a narrow examination table, his face ashen beneath his tan. "He's been asking for you," Mrs. Miller said softly. "Wouldn't let the doctor give him laudanum until you arrived." Cole's eyes, cloudy with pain, focused when she approached. His left arm was splinted, and a nasty gash ran along his temple, but he managed a weak smile. "There you are. Told Doc you'd come." "Of course I came, you fool," she whispered, taking his uninjured hand. "What happened?" "Rattlesnake spooked my horse, took a tumble down that steep slope by Coyote Creek." He winced as he shifted slightly. "Doc says my arm's broken in 2 places, and I've got some cracked ribs. Won't be much use at the ranch for at least 6 weeks." Josephine felt a chill of understanding. A cowboy who couldn't work was a cowboy without wages or lodging. "Where will you go?" "That's why I needed to see you." Despite his obvious pain, determination filled his voice. "I've been saving to buy a small plot. Just 10 acres, but it's good land with a year-round spring. I put down a deposit last month. There's a cabin, nothing fancy, just 1 room and a lean-to, but it's solid." Confusion furrowed her brow. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need to ask you something important, and this wasn't how I planned it." He squeezed her hand. "I love you, Josephine Vance. I've known it since the 3rd time I saw you concentrating so hard on your inventory ledger that you had that little wrinkle between your eyebrows. I planned to ask you properly once I had the deed in hand, but now." He gestured to his broken body. "Ask me what?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Marry me. I can't offer much, especially not right now, but I swear I'll build us a good life." Josephine stared at him, searching for any sign of pity or desperation in his eyes, finding only sincere love and apprehension at her silence. Still, doubt crept in. "Is this because you need someone to help while you heal? Because if that's—" "Josephine," he interrupted gently, "I've had the ring for 2 months. It's in my saddlebag if someone could fetch it from my gear." "Mrs. Miller, who had been pretending not to listen from the doorway, hurried off to fulfill the request. When she returned with a small leather pouch, Cole awkwardly opened it one-handed and tipped a simple gold band with a tiny pearl into his palm. "It was my grandmother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it, waiting for the right moment. Turns out the right moment is when you realize you might have died without telling the woman you love how much she means to you." Tears blurred Josephine's vision as decades of built-up defenses crumbled. This man, this kind, hardworking man, saw her as whole and worthy, not despite her imperfection but with complete acceptance of who she was. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Cole Evans." His smile was brilliant even through his pain. "Doc," he called out, "I believe I'm ready for that laudanum now, and perhaps you could send for the preacher while you're at it." Doc Miller chuckled as he entered the room with a small brown bottle. "Let's get you patched up first, young man. Weddings can wait until you're standing." But Cole shook his head stubbornly. "With respect, Doc, I've waited long enough. If Josephine is willing, I'd like to make her my wife today." Josephine's practical nature asserted itself. "Cole, you're in no condition." "I'm in perfect condition to make vows," he insisted. "The rest can wait until I'm healed, but I want you to have my name and protection now, especially if—" He didn't finish the thought, but she understood. If the worst should happen, if his injuries proved more serious than they appeared, he wanted her provided for. Within 2 hours, Reverend Simmons had been fetched, and Josephine found herself standing beside Cole's sickbed, exchanging vows in the presence of the doctor, his wife, and the ranch foreman who had brought Cole to town. It wasn't the wedding she might have imagined as a young girl, but as she looked into her husband's eyes, her husband, she couldn't imagine a more perfect moment. The first weeks of their marriage were not the typical honeymoon period. With Cole confined to bed in their small cabin, Josephine divided her time between nursing him, working reduced hours at the store, and learning the basic routines of their small homestead. The 10 acres Cole had purchased included a vegetable garden, 2 milk cows, and a small apple orchard that needed harvesting before the first frost. "I'm sorry you have to do so much," Cole said one evening as she massaged liniment into his healing ribs. "This isn't what you signed up for." Josephine smiled softly. "Funny, I seem to recall promising in sickness and in health just a few weeks ago." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "When I'm back on my feet, I'll make it up to you, I promise." "You already have," she replied, and she meant it. For the first time in her life, Josephine felt truly valued. Each morning when she rose, moving around the cabin with her familiar uneven gait, she caught Cole watching her with admiration rather than pity. When tasks proved challenging because of her leg, they found ways to adapt together, with Cole suggesting clever adjustments to make her work easier. By late November, Cole had healed enough to move around with the aid of a walking stick, a development that amused them both. "Look at us," Josephine laughed as they made their slow way to the garden one crisp afternoon, each leaning on a stick. "What a pair we make." Cole put his arm around her shoulders. "The finest pair in the territory, I'd say." Their happiness, however, was interrupted one December morning when Mr. MacGregor came to the cabin, his expression grave. "There's trouble brewing, Cole," he said after declining Josephine's offer of coffee. "Cattlemen's Association is up in arms about water rights for the spring creek that runs through your property. Edward Evans claims he was promised access when he bought the adjacent section last year." Cole frowned. "The deed is clear. The water rights belong to this parcel." MacGregor nodded. "That's what the county records show, but Evans has produced a letter supposedly written by the previous owner, promising continued access. He's threatening legal action." After the older man left, Cole paced the cabin, his face troubled. "This could be serious, Joe. The spring is what makes this land valuable. Without guaranteed water rights, we'd be at the mercy of the larger ranchers." Josephine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "What can we do?" "I need to ride to the county seat, check the records myself. Maybe there's something we've overlooked." She grabbed his arm. "You're still healing. The road to Prescott is rough even in good weather." "I have to try. This is our future, Joe." The next morning, Cole departed for Prescott despite Josephine's concerns. She threw herself into work to distract from her worry, deep cleaning the cabin and making candles from the tallow she'd been rendering. 3 days later, with still no sign of Cole's return, Josephine was startled by the sound of approaching horses. Hope rising, she hurried to the door only to find Edward Evans himself, accompanied by 2 of his ranch hands. "Mrs. Evans," he greeted her with cold formality, "I've come to discuss the matter of the water rights." "My husband has gone to Prescott to examine the county records," she replied, standing as straight as her leg would allow. "I suggest you return when he's here." Evans dismounted, his considerable bulk making the action seem awkward. He was a man in his 50s, with wealth accumulated through decades of shrewd, some said ruthless, business dealings. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement without all that legal wrangling," he suggested, his tone falsely genial. "I'm prepared to offer a fair price for this parcel, more than fair, considering." Josephine's spine stiffened. "This land isn't for sale, Mr. Evans." "Don't be hasty, Mrs. Evans. A young couple just starting out could use that capital, and with your—" his gaze flicked meaningfully to her leg. "Well, frontier life isn't easy for those in perfect health, let alone—" "I believe my wife said the land isn't for sale." Cole's voice cut through the tension as he rode into the yard, his face set in hard lines she'd never seen before. He dismounted carefully, still favoring his healing ribs, but his stance was unmistakably protective as he came to stand beside Josephine. Evans's expression soured. "Being stubborn is a poor strategy, boy. You're new to these parts, so let me explain how things work. Water in this territory means everything. Men who control it prosper, those who stand in the way—" He left the threat hanging. Cole produced a document from his saddlebag. "County records are quite clear, Mr. Evans. The spring and creek belong to this property, with no encumbrances or prior agreements. The letter you've been showing around town. Courthouse has no record of it ever being filed." "You calling me a liar, boy?" Evans took a threatening step forward. "I'm saying the law is on our side. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave our property." For a tense moment, Josephine feared Evans might resort to violence, but after a calculating look at Cole, he turned away. "This isn't over," he said as he mounted his horse. "Not by a long shot." After Evans and his men departed, Cole sagged against the cabin wall, his face pale with exhaustion. "I rode straight through from Prescott," he explained as Josephine helped him inside. "Had a feeling there might be trouble." Over a hastily prepared meal, Cole shared what he'd learned. The previous owner had indeed signed a letter agreeing to water access, but it had been a personal arrangement, not a legal easement. When the land changed hands, the agreement became void. "Evans knows he has no legal claim," Cole concluded. "But he also knows small homesteaders like us rarely have the resources to fight powerful cattlemen in court." That night, lying beside her husband in their narrow bed, Josephine voiced her deepest fear. "What if we can't win this, Cole? What if we lose everything we're building?" He pulled her close, his voice resolute in the darkness. "We won't, I promise you that, Joe. This is our home, and I won't let anyone take it from us." The winter months brought escalating tensions. Fences along their property line were mysteriously cut. Their milk cow was found wandering miles from home. Anonymous notes were left tacked to their door, suggesting accidents befell stubborn homesteaders who didn't know their place. Through it all, Cole and Josephine presented a united front. As his strength returned, Cole worked from dawn till dusk reinforcing their claim, repairing fences, clearing additional land, and most importantly, documenting every hostile action for the territorial courts. Josephine contributed equally to their defense. Her years of keeping meticulous inventory records served them well, as she maintained detailed accounts of every incident. She also leveraged her connections in town, subtly ensuring that Evans's intimidation tactics became common knowledge among the merchants and townspeople whose goodwill he needed. By early spring, their situation had reached a crisis point. Evans had filed a formal lawsuit claiming water rights, and though their legal position was sound, the cost of defending themselves threatened to exhaust their modest savings. "We could sell the east section," Josephine suggested one evening as they pored over their finances. It's the least productive part anyway. Cole shook his head. If we start selling pieces, we'll never stop. Evans will just find another way to pressure us for the next section, and the next. A knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Cole opened it cautiously, hand near the rifle kept by the entrance, only to find Mr. MacGregor standing there with several other townspeople. "Evening, Cole, Josephine," the storekeeper said. "Mind if we come in, got something important to discuss." Bemused, the couple welcomed the unexpected delegation. MacGregor, Reverend Simmons, Mrs. Daniels from the boarding house, and several small business owners from town. "We've been watching what Evans is trying to do," MacGregor began without preamble, "and we've had enough. He's been throwing his weight around Cottonwood Springs for too long, threatening anyone who doesn't bend to his will." Mrs. Daniels nodded vigorously. "Tried to force me to sell my boarding house last year so he could build a saloon. Only backed down when half the town threatened to boycott his cattle business." "The point is," Reverend Simmons interjected, "we've taken up a collection to help with your legal expenses." He placed a small leather pouch on the table. "It's not charity," he added quickly, noting Cole's expression. "It's an investment in making sure bullies like Evans don't get to make their own laws in this territory." Josephine felt tears well in her eyes at this unexpected show of community support. "We don't know what to say." "Say you'll fight him all the way," MacGregor replied gruffly. "Some of us have been waiting years for someone with the grit to stand up to Evans properly." That night, after their visitors had departed, Cole held Josephine close. "Did you see what happened there?" he asked softly. "They're helping us fight Evans. More than that, they see us, you and me, as people worth standing behind, not just me, Joe, us. Equal partners deserving of their respect." The realization washed over Josephine like a cleansing rain. These people, her neighbors and community, hadn't looked at her limp or Cole's youth and seen weakness. They had seen their determination, their integrity, their unwillingness to be bullied. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered. "A husband who sees me as whole, a community that values us, a home worth fighting for." Cole kissed her gently. "You deserve all of it and more." The court date was set for mid-April. As Josephine and Cole prepared to leave for the county seat, a rider approached their cabin at a gallop. It was one of the young boys who helped at the livery stable in town. "Mr. and Mrs. Evans," he called, breathless from his hard ride. "You need to come quick. There's a fire at your property line near the spring." They raced to the site to find flames consuming the dry grass dangerously close to their cabin. Evans and several of his men were already there, ostensibly helping to fight the blaze. "Terrible accident," Evans called when he spotted them. "Lightning must have struck that old cottonwood." Cole's jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene. There hadn't been a storm in days, and the fire's origin was suspiciously close to where their property line met Evans's land. For hours they fought the flames alongside townspeople who had seen the smoke and come to help. By nightfall the fire was contained, but not before it had damaged their garden and the small barn Cole had built during the winter. As they surveyed the destruction, Sheriff Taylor approached, his expression grim. "Found this near where the fire started," he said, holding up an oil lamp with the double E brand burned into its base. "Mighty careless of someone to leave it out here." Evans, overhearing, blustered indignantly. "That proves nothing, could have been carried from anywhere." "Maybe so," the sheriff replied evenly. "But I'm more interested in what young Billy Thompson has to say. Claims he overheard you offering $50 to anyone who could create a distraction that would keep the Evans family from making their court date tomorrow." A murmur ran through the gathered crowd. Evans's face darkened as he realized how many witnesses were present. "The boy's lying," he snapped. "And even if there was such a conversation, you can't prove it had anything to do with this fire." "Perhaps not," Cole said, stepping forward. "But I imagine the territorial judge will be very interested to hear about it, especially alongside our documentation of the other accidents that have plagued our property since you tried to buy it." Something in Cole's calm certainty seemed to finally penetrate Evans's arrogance. He looked around at the assembled townspeople, noting their hostile expressions, and for the first time uncertainty crossed his face. "This isn't worth my time," he muttered. "Keep your miserable little spring. I'm buying the Mitchell property east of town, better water access anyway." As Evans and his men rode away, Sheriff Taylor shook his head. "He's backing down for now, but I'd still be careful. Men like that don't take defeat easily." The next day, Josephine and Cole appeared in court as scheduled. To their surprise, neither Evans nor his lawyer was present. The judge, after reviewing their documentation and the county records, ruled decisively in their favor, confirming their water rights and issuing a stern warning against further interference. The ride home was triumphant, though tempered by the knowledge that they faced significant work rebuilding what the fire had damaged. As they crested the hill overlooking their small homestead, Cole reined in his horse. "Look at that," he said, pointing to their property. Josephine gasped. At least a dozen wagons were parked around their cabin, and twice as many people moved purposefully around their land. Some were clearing the burned debris, others were already framing up a new, larger barn, and still others were working in the scorched garden, replanting what had been lost. "They came to help us rebuild," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. Cole took her hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "That's what community means, Joe. Something Evans will never understand with all his money and power." As they rode down to join their neighbors, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been certain no man would ever see beyond her limp to love the woman she was. She had believed herself destined for a solitary existence on the margins of frontier society. Instead, she had found not only a husband who cherished her completely, but also her rightful place within a community that valued strength of character over physical perfection. Her limp hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it had ceased to define her, both in her own eyes and in the eyes of those who mattered. By the time summer arrived, their homestead had been not just restored but improved. The new barn was twice the size of the original, with space for additional livestock. Their garden flourished, and the spring that had caused so much conflict burbled peacefully through their land, nurturing crops and animals alike. On a warm July evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Cole placed his hand gently on Josephine's belly. "Are you certain?" he asked, wonder filling his voice. She covered his hand with her own, smiling at the cautious hope in his eyes. "Doc Miller confirmed it yesterday. Come winter, there'll be 3 of us in this cabin." Cole gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the joy words couldn't express. When he finally drew back, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "You've given me everything I ever dreamed of, Joe. A home, a future, and now a family." Josephine touched his face tenderly, marveling at how completely her life had transformed. "And you showed me that I was always whole, always worthy of love. I just needed someone who could see it." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, planning their future with quiet confidence. There would be challenges ahead, there always were on the frontier, but they would face them together, secure in the knowledge that they had already overcome the greatest obstacles, the false beliefs that had nearly kept them from finding each other. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the haunting sound carrying across the desert. Josephine leaned against her husband's solid strength, no longer the woman who believed herself unwanted, but instead a beloved wife, a mother-to-be, and an equal partner in the life they were building on this hard-won land they called home.